Welcome to episode 3 in the wall unit build series. In this episode, we're building the wine rack, which has some drawers attached to the side, and it will sit on the bottom right hand corner of the wall unit. First thing to do with the build was to break down the plywood sheets. I already had them cut to width, and so it was just a matter of cutting those now to length as well, and just did that using the crosscut jig here. Now I just run all the pieces through the table saw just to make sure the edges are nice and square and parallel to each other. Here I'm cutting out a 6mm recess in the corner at the back of all the panels just to sit the rear plywood sheet into later on, as you'll see. Now I run each of the side pieces where the shelves sit through the table saw, and I have some fences set up on both sides so that I can cut these consistent on both sides of where the shelves will sit. In order to keep the wine bottles separated on the shelves, what I decided to do for this was to use some little strips of wood, and these would just be placed evenly across each of the shelves, and so here I'm just cutting all of those out. I cut them all to length using a crosscut sled, and that made them all very consistent in size and also had nice clean square edges. Now all 42 of these strips of wood I ended up sanding by hand. That was 6 different sides I had to do on each one, so that definitely took quite a lot of effort. You'll see here that I'm using a spacer block. This lets me set all of the little strips of wood consistently apart. The brad nailer here was playing up a little. I had to fire it twice to get the nails to shoot through. There was a bit of a jam, which I had to clear out of it later on. Now, as with the rest of the build, there's going to be quite a lot of edges of the plywood visible, and so here I'm just trying to keep those clean by applying some masking tape before I do any painting or finishing. Once the first coat was dried, I did a light sanding just by hand and then repeated that whole painting process with a second coat. Any of the joinery that wasn't going to be visible from the front of the cabinet, I ended up just using pocket holes on this piece. I was a bit more cautious on the previous two parts of the build, just because they were going to be sort of on display for a little bit before the wall unit was completed. That wasn't really the case here, so this was going to finish that whole first bottom section, so I didn't really care much about having visible joinery on the edges. Now, with most of the cabinet build done, it's just a matter of building the drawers. I varied a little bit from my initial design, ended up going with some shorter and taller drawers. So this basically gave me some more different usability options when I had it installed in the wall. Here you'll see I'm cutting some recesses for the bottom of the drawer to sit into. I did this before I cut each piece to width, so that all of those pieces were consistent. I'm using the crosscut sled here to make a half lap joint on the front and the back of the drawer boxes. This just allows a bit more glue surface area and also really helps with putting it all together. Here I'm marking where the first of the drawers will go in. This is basically for the drawer slides to be screwed onto. And here I'm attaching the parts of the drawer slides that attach to the drawer themselves. Once I had all 4 drawer boxes installed in the unit, I cut out the piece that was going to be the front of the drawers. I wanted the grain to carry across all of them, so I did that using one large piece and then cut that into the smaller drawer sizes sort of keeping the grain connected. I found that using masking tape on the veneer edge kept the grain from tearing out as much, so that's why you see me doing that here. Definitely more of a problem cutting across the grain than width, but still made a difference for both. I used the template here to cut out the drawer handles. These are just little notches that sit on the top of the drawer front. Once I had them sketched out onto the drawer face itself, I then just cut that out using a dovetail saw and a coping saw. Once that was all cut out roughly, I then reattached the template to the drawer front and then used a flush trim bit on the router to clean that up. Once everything was finished, I then applied 2 coats of hardwax oil to all of the drawer fronts and also to the edges of the plywood that were visible. So for the wine rack cabinet and also for the other 2 bases of the wall unit, I ended up attaching these leveling feet. These let me adjust the heights of each of the corners of the pieces to make sure they were nice and level, not just left and right, but also front and back. So the only thing that was left here was to attach the backing board, which I just did with some brad nails, and then just sign my work like normal.